Okay, so sorry about our little hiccup there, everybody. So all I have done now, if you missed it on the first go, I had accidentally put the wrong base coat down, the wrong color for my base coat, but that is okay. Our lovely acrylic paint is decently forgiving. And I just went back over and put my actual base coat down. So hopefully you can see that it actually is much darker. I honestly was a little concerned before that I had picked very poor colors. But it turns out I just didn't put the right colors on that I had picked. So anyway, so we're doing fine. We are okay. I just base coated it on everything, and I am pulling off a little bit of excess paint that I had put on accident, but otherwise I think we're doing okay. We're mostly just looking for it to dry for us, and pulling this excess paint off is going to help with that drying. Okay, so we're doing all right. Pulling some excess paint. There we go. All right. Okay. There we are. All right. So with that being done, I think looks like my eyes are pretty dry. The body I'm still waiting for to dry, and it looks like the mouth is still pretty damp. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the eyes. It doesn't hurt us in what order we do some of these things. And sometimes actually you may want to do the eyes first on some critters because they may have more inset eyes, and I usually try and to do like the deeper inset pieces first and then work out from there. So it does not hurt us to do the eyes at all. So the color I have picked up right now is an off-white color. That's just a preference of mine. I really like using off-white colors, so it's not super off from white, but just enough to give it a more natural look. Because if you look at a real person's eyes, or if you look at bone, neither are actually, most of the time, are not actually a white color. Especially, I would think, for some kind of monster, an abomination, such as a beholder or a spectator. It makes sense that they wouldn't be a pure white kind of color. So, that is why I like to use this off-white. If you only have white, that is not a problem. You can absolutely use white, just a regular, pure white, for your eyes and for your bones. Most of the time, it's not going to make a difference to people. This is just a preference of my own that I really have. I've moved to my smaller paintbrush, and because I've used a very dark base coat, a very dark base coat for my eyes, it is going to take some layering. And so this is just going to be, my first coat of many on the eyes. So question, do I ever use gray and white for the eyes? I have not necessarily, honestly, no, I don't think I have. I've not used a grayish color for eyes. I have used it for like the colored part of the eye, but not the actual eyeball itself. But that could be very interesting especially for a monster, to have that like hazy kind of look for their eye. So definitely an intriguing color to be certain. Okay, so looking back at some older questions, in case they didn't really get, in case you don't feel like they were fully answered, we had a question about using nail files on our miniatures, and I do on my pewter miniatures. I will use a nail file. In fact, I at a convention one time, I had found these like about this long, very small files, but they and they were kind of different sizes and shapes, or not different sizes, but different shapes, and they were really nice for my like smaller people miniatures, because they could get into like some of the cracks and things like between their arms, and stuff like that. So for my metal miniatures, I do like to use the files to trim down some of those molding lines and things like that. However, for my plastic miniatures, I don't really care to use files on them if I can help it. I have before, but the problem I have found with them in plastic, and maybe this is my impatience, but the problem I have found with the plastic ones is that they tend to leave almost like a texture behind on the plastic. They don't quite evenly, smoothly run down or sand down the miniature. If you have like a very fine file, that can work a lot nicer on the plastic miniatures, and so that would be probably a pretty good use of files on plastic miniatures. But again, most of the time I just don't use them, if I can help it. All right, we're just covering these eyes. They're just, there's small little circles, and I'm trying not to get too much into the actual like main part of the creature. I don't want to have to try and cover that up too much. So something as we go along that you'll notice is the color that is underneath our base coat, or our bottom piece of whatever, or bottom color that is underneath of whatever we're applying, will make a difference on the tone and the shade of what we are applying on top. So if I was applying this white to a gray kind of color, or even the whitish gray that this miniature started out as, it would be it would look a lot different than what it's looking right now. And it's kind of darker now. It maybe doesn't seem quite as even. So even in the video, you can kind of see how the dark shines through on this miniature here. Whereas if I had a white base, it would be very different. And so that being said, I don't want this white to necessarily get on the other aspects of this miniature that I don't want to be a lighter color, because even just adding this dark purple back onto those areas, that purple is going to look lighter because it has a white, off-white base underneath of it. So that's why we go from the darker colors to the lighter colors. Or sometimes we don't apply a dark color to the underside because we don't want that shadow or that underlying color showing through. or changing the color of what we're trying to use. So we had a question about modifying minis and like kind of like maybe what I've done on those kind of things and stuff like that. And so I do like to modify minis. It's pretty fun. In fact, there's been times where I've gone to conventions and just like they put out like a giant box of just random pieces, and then you just kind of like make your own beast or person, and that's really fun. I do enjoy doing those. But let's see, most of the time on average I will probably only do like change of a weapon, or maybe add some kind of effect or piece on the base out of green stuff. You know, I'll like make my own little skull or something to add to the base, or, you know, things like that. Like on average, that's probably what the most like additions I do to miniatures. But again, when I've gone to those conventions and there's been just those boxes of pieces and parts, I really enjoy just like taking some random things. I had one at the last convention I went to that I had a bat wing on one side and a feathered wing on the other side, and the feathered wing was upside down. And I took Displacer Beast tentacles and like put them along the sides of this torso, and it was just crazy monster. And it had like this little skirt thing. It was just it was just really, really hilarious. But yeah, so that can be really fun if you just have some random parts from something, or if you go to a convention where they're doing kind of a mashup thing like that. It is really fun to do that kind of stuff. So I do recommend like trying new things out like that. Okay. I think most of my beholder is pretty dry, so I'm gonna go ahead and move back over to my purple that I was supposed to be using here as the middle color. That really pretty purple that I liked before. And it's kind of drying out, so I actually do want to add some water to that so that it will flow a little nicer for me. I don't want tacky paint when I am applying something smooth like a middle coat. So I'm just going to add a little water to that. Maybe add some fresh paint. Let's make sure I grab the right one this time. There we go. Add a little couple more drops on there. So for those of you that have potentially painted before and had what's called a wet palette, that's probably what I should have. I just didn't end up doing it today. For those of you that have not painted with a wet palette before, but if you live in a drier kind of region, like Missouri can get dry sometimes, but a lot of times like Texas is a very dry place, and Arizona, things like that, they're very dry, and your paints can dry out a lot faster in a dry area. Or even if you just have your heat on at your house, it can really dry out your paints pretty quickly. So what you can do is create a wet palette, and I typically have like, you can buy wet palettes just by themselves and you just add the water and you're fine. But I like to make my own. It's cheaper and it works just fine. So I'll take a paper plate and I will take a paper towel, and I usually like to have the two sheets folded in half and then fold it into a quarter. Put that in the bottom of my paper plate, and then you put a little bit of water in that, or on that paper towel, and then put a piece of parchment of some kind. A lot of people like to use butcher paper because it absorbs more water. And so they'll put butcher paper down, or sometimes you can use wax paper. Wax paper is not as good, but it will still work. some kind of parchment paper. And then you've got a surface that you can put your paint on, and it will absorb that water and keep your paints wet while you're painting. And so it's called a wet palette. And it can work really nicely in those dry areas. So some people will actually use the paper towel itself to put the paint directly on it. I don't personally like to do that. I find that it will the paint absorbs into the paper towel, and then too quickly, I think. And then you're kind of having to refill your paints more frequently and things like that. So, but it's not impossible. So if you're in a super duper dry region, that might be what you want to do. It also makes the paint pretty wet at that point too. Oh, I just got the purple on my eye. Oh well. It also makes the paint really wet as well. And so just know that if you're doing it that way, you're not going to want to add additional water to it. So it just all has to do with preference and practicing and things like that. If you enjoy using watercolor for different things, just regular watercolor, then it using straight onto a paper towel might end up working very well for you. I am terrible with watercolor, and so that's probably why it frustrates me. Okay. The beholder's still pretty dark. I'm going to move on to my lighter purple that I have. Try my paintbrush. And I know I mentioned this in the last video, but again, just for those folks that, you know, weren't able to join us before, I do want to reiterate that I really highly recommend not leaving your paintbrushes in your water, even just between things. Like, just take the extra moment to fully clean your brush out and lay it down, rather than actually leaving it in the water container, because the bristles, when they're sitting in your cup, gravity pulls them down and they will spread. And just like a person's hair underwater, anybody that's watched The Little Mermaid, just like a person's hair underwater, the bristles will spread in the water, just like real hair does. And so we don't want our bristles to be practicing the separation in the water, and then gravity to be pulling the bristles down and apart and away from each other. And so with all these different pieces kind of playing against our brush, it's more likely that it'll end up more like this brush that I have, that is very like widespread, versus, oh, there we go, some of my other brushes that can hold their tip a little better. Okay, so so just something to think about. Don't leave your brushes in your paint water. Oh, the other piece, I always forget this one, but the other piece of that is that your paintbrush the bristles are glued into this metal piece here, in the top, or in the bottom of your bristles there, and that glue is solvable. Goodness, I can't say that word, but it will dissolve in water after time. And so that is going to hurt your bristles because they're more likely to fall out at that point. So that can really hurt your paintbrush as well when those bristles start to fall out, because the glue is dissolving inside of your paintbrush. So just a couple reasons. So I am picky about some of my brushes, but I also like to use kind of a bigger brush. So you may see people use like a very, very tiny brush, but that just doesn't hold very much paint. And it can be nice to use those super, super tiny ones for like eyes or something that's like super tiny detail that you don't need very much paint for. But that being said, I really prefer some of these bigger brushes. Like this is my typical brush that I use. It's bigger. I use this for all my details. But the point, it comes to a very nice point when it's wet. And that is what I look for in my brushes. So not necessarily name brand, but how well does the brush hold its point on the size that I prefer, you know? And so this is typically the size that I end up preferring. Get that wet so it shows a little bit better. There we go. So this is the size that I kind of prefer. So I go by, okay, this is the size I want. How well do I know that this brand holds its sharp point? And that way will hold enough water to keep my paints going and hold my paint in the brush and things like that. So, okay, so that all being said, I tell you all of that to then tell you that I use both cheap brushes and some more pricey brushes. And the pricey brushes that I tend to choose, this one here is Raphael. I really like that brand. They have proven to hold their point extremely well. There's another one that's very similar to Raphael called Da Vinci, and I really like those ones as well because they tend to hold their point more so for me. Outside of that, so those brushes can range between like $15 to $20 a piece, and that is outrageous to me, but I enjoy painting, so I spend it. But anyway, if you don't, and I will say I've had that brush for almost 4 years now. So $20 brush has lasted me 4 years, and I still love it, so it's not too terribly bad. But anyway, maybe you can't, afford that much right off the bat, and that's totally fine. If you're not worried about like tossing out a brush after a few months of heavy use, I have literally gotten this pack of like green brushes, like this part's all green, and the size is in between these two. It's a little bigger than this, but a little smaller than this one, and I've used that for just about everything. Like I'll use it for my base coating, I'll use it for my detail, because for at least a couple of months it held a nice sharp tip like this one. Once it started to fray, I was like, well, you were a 50-cent brush, I'm tossing you, So it just kind of depends on what you can afford and how willing you are to toss things away when they literally just don't work anymore. So if you are looking for starting kits and things like that, there's lots of good stuff out there that you can kind of go for depending on what you kind of want to do. But I honestly started with picking what miniatures I wanted to paint first. Like what did I want to start getting into? And most of the time for me, it was monsters. I really just enjoy painting monsters and animals. So what need did I have to get some skin tones? I wasn't focused on things that would go for people, which I have gotten into now, but that's not where I started. So then I would buy pieces that went along with the miniatures that I was wanting to paint. So I really love wolves. I would get colors that I believed should be used on wolves. And then I also really like dragons, and I usually paint my dragons to be the D&D type dragons. And so I started using some of those. And then I just kind of built my collection from there. And then the paint brushes, I really kind of just picked my own paintbrushes for a while and was getting those cheap ones that I was talking about. But then I started having some people recommend some other paintbrushes for me. And so then I started kind of picking up some of those, different things like that. This paintbrush is not big enough. I'm going to get a bigger paintbrush. So I don't know that I necessarily have a specific brand that I recommend with starting out, or a specific like kit or anything like that. If you can afford those bigger kits that have like a miniature that you can start out with these certain colors, and it comes with a paintbrush, awesome. Grab one of those just to help you get started. But I piecemealed mine together over several years and just kind of went as I could, bought what I could. I started in college, and so I just kind of kept building my collection from that point. So it just kind of varies, like where you're at in your painting hobby, and kind of what you want to do from there. If it's a piecemeal thing, or if you want to start with a certain kit and things like that. Not that these are the best by any means, but I do very much like Reaper paint. I feel like it's always a good consistency, like in the flow of the paint, and so I really do like those a lot. And then the other one that I really like is P3. I really like these ones. I really honestly don't even know why I like those P3s. I think they just make some really nice colors. So, and they just go with a lot of different things. So I use a lot of P3 for my base coating and things like that. So those are probably my two favorite brands. But honestly, if you looked at my paint collection at home, I have a ton of different kinds of paints that I just piecemealed them all together. I don't know if that's helpful, but hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Okay, so I usually have my paints, so storing and organizing paints, that is kind of a recent change for me, actually. I had recently moved, and so I actually have a larger area to store all my crafting stuff. It used to be that I had my paints stored in those plastic clear totes that you would use for like fishing stuff, like fishing tackle boxes and stuff like that. Like I would just put them in those, and it worked just fine. But then, sometimes you'd have to kind of like search through the box to see, what's available, what do I have, and you got to pull a few out, and you're like, oh, maybe that's not the color I wanted, so you don't get to really to view everything that you have, and so that kind of sucks. So with my larger space that I have at my new house, I've actually been able to have these like stair step displays that I've been able to have like all my paints like stacked on these stair steps, so I can actually see a little bit of each of the colors, and I can get a better idea of what I'm grabbing for, which is really nice. So, so if you have that opportunity where you can have your paints out and actually be able to see what your options are and what you can be using, I will tell you that it is very, very handy to have that as an option. But I know that that's not everybody's option, so not everybody can do that. Um, so if you just have just like a tackle box or something like that, those work great. Just anything that would kind of have like be able to store a bottle top side up. So you don't want, I don't really care to lay my paints down if possible. I usually like to have them up and down if I can. It's more about like where the particles settle in the paint, which is, so that's the reason that I kind of prefer it that way. But I honestly don't have any science behind that. I just my brain is like, I don't like it to settle on the side. I'd rather it settle at the bottom, and I have to shake it up. So I can't tell you that that's the best way to do it, but that's the way I do it. All right. Okay. So I think I'm going to move on to my more detail-esque brush, and I think I'm going to make some of these little horns on the back of my beholder and on his chin stand out a little bit more before I get going into any more detail on the actual beholder itself. So I've got my off-white. I'm going to put a little bit more down for me on my palette. Okay, there we go. There we are. All right, now this one I don't want it to flow. I don't want it to run as much. So I'm actually going to try to do this without watering down this paint and see how that goes. Sometimes the issue with that can be that the paint will get kind of tacky, but I think we're going to be pretty safe with this. So let me see. Yeah, I think we're okay. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to water this one down then. So this little Spectator, he's got little spikies on him, and they may not necessarily be bone, but if I paint them like bone, then they're bone, right? So that's what I'm gonna do. I like some of my monsters to be kind of creepy and have protruding horns and all that kind of jazz going on them, and so that's what I'm gonna do with this little guy. Just gonna paint these horns here, and like I said, I'm using my off-white to do this. You don't have to do that by any means. Depending on what paints that you have, maybe you have something that's specifically called bone and that's what you want to use, and that's perfectly fine. If you want them to be some other discolored spikes or something like that, then that's also fine. You know, you can make these fantasy aberrations look like, you know, whatever you want. When we were painting the Griffin, we really tried to do more, you know, realistic things that you would be able to see in real life, so that we could fool the eye into, and the brain into thinking it's, you know, really seeing a creature that might exist, you know, kind of thing. So we mimic what we see in the real world. Well, things like the Spectator and beholders and what else? You know, different critters, different creatures that we wouldn't actually see in real life. Illithids, you know, mind flayers kind of thing. We can really do whatever we want with them, because who's to say that's not what they would look like if they were real, you know? So play with your Spectator, or if you're following along with a beholder instead, that's fine. You know, just play around with them. What do you want it to look like? Different things like that. And like somebody asked earlier about adding different aspects to, or modifying miniatures and things like that. And maybe that's something that you want to do, and that's something you can really do a lot of cool things with monsters like this. You can add different aspects to them. Like at home, I have some different medium kind of bases where, like one, it looks kind of like dried blood. One that makes an area look like it's wet. And so even like you'll notice like when paint's wet, it's a little shinier, but when it dries, it's a lot of times more matted unless it has something in it that is specifically glossy. And so I have a liquid at home that you can put on top of an area, and it makes it look like it's continuously wet. So like water, different things like that. And so like I could make this guy have some kind of saliva coming off of his tongue, and he's drooling or something like that. So you can add different aspects to your creatures. I talked earlier in this session about like if you find a hole, like something in your creature, your miniature that is not supposed to be there, you can use it to kind of play around with some other aspects. So again, adding like maybe an arrow or a bolt of some kind that would make it look like it has been attacked recently. Something to that aspect. And look pretty interesting, give it a different look, and set your miniature apart from other things. That's actually something, if you decide you want to do competitions at all, I would recommend doing things like that, because it will catch the judge's eye that something's different. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times the people that are judging those competitions, they have seen, miniatures, especially if you're just joining an actual miniature competition. They've seen those miniatures before. And so if you do something to alter the way that that miniature looks, it's going to catch their eye. And, it can really set you apart from the competition. So just kind of things to think about when you are painting your own miniatures. Okay. Now I've touched several areas through here with this off-white color, and that's okay. We're going to go back over it anyway, but that gives me a few little spikies on the back of his head. So kind of like that. Alright, I'm going to move on to his chin here. He does have some spikes on his chin. So let's just kind of put those on there. So for these ones, I'm being a little more careful because they're going to be a little more obvious, and they're kind of more shadowed kind of areas. So I'm trying not to hit the inside near the beholder's mouth if I can help it. We can always cover things, and that's totally fine, but I'm just trying not to if I can help it. So anyway, so as I'm doing that, the way that I am trying to do so is I'm using the tip of my brush to try and go right up closest to the inside of where I'm trying to cover, so the closest to the actual beholder's body. Do like a little bit of a line there, and then pull away. So that way my brush is moving the opposite direction of the actual miniature itself. And so that's ideally keeping my paint farthest away from the body as I can. So lining up next to the inside and then pull away. So around the inside and then pull away. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Around the inside, pull away. It is kind of hard on this little guy. He's got so many different crevices and things. It's kind of hard to see what do I want to make look like it's a bone and what is just bumps on his body, on his skin, just because he's such a weird little critter. So it can be kind of tough to make those decisions, and don't be afraid to pause and look over, look over things. And something I have done with other miniatures is I will sometimes pull up, like, what does the monster manual say this thing looks like, if I want to kind of get at least a little bit of an idea. Or how have other people painted this miniature? So a lot of times you can pull up online and see what other people have done, and that can sometimes give you kind of a better idea of what the different pieces of the miniature are. So that can also kind of be helpful. You by no means have to do that, though, obviously, because again, these monstrous creatures, they're all fantasy. So who's to say that the person painted it the right way anyway? But it can be nice to do that if you do have concerns. Oh, man, I got a good glob of white on that one. Let me see if I can pull some of that off. There we go. Okay. Not the best, but it was still wet. So the white that I had gotten on that inside there, I was able to wet my brush and pull that back out because that paint was still wet. Now you can still see some white in there, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. If you don't realize it and you don't act quickly enough, which is something I had done on this side over here, we can always just go over it, and if you have to put multiple coats on, then you gotta put multiple coats on. It's fine. Again, with acrylic, it's nice to be able to have that those grounds to make those adjustments with acrylic, because you can always layer things on as long as you're using a thin coat to begin with. Alright. Going back over some of these ones on the top that I had already done, is again, since we had such a dark undercoat to these ones, they are really showing through those other, that purple color is really kind of showing through on them. So I'm just going back over them to make them just a little brighter, a little more white, a little more off-white, I guess. There we go. Just kind of giving them some touch-ups. There we are. Okay, I think we're looking okay there. Just checking my underside. I'm thinking I maybe put white on the wrong place up here, but that's okay too. Okay. I am going to move over to the mouth because, like I mentioned before, if we work from the interior of things and work our way out, we're going to more likely not end up affecting that poorly in the future. So, so I'm going to do the interior of the mouth and then work my way out. And I think what I'm going to do is something similar to what I did with this guy here. Where, I don't know how well you can actually see that, but I put a very dark, and I may end up actually, I'm probably going to end up doing black actually, yeah. So I'll do black on the inside of his mouth, and then fade that into the tongue, So, dang it, sorry. That way it looks kind of very deep. His mouth looks very deep in inset. Let me see here. A little black out here. There we go. Okay, this one can be a little thinner, so I am going to grab some water, put that out there. There we go. Okay. Alright, I definitely got too much black. Don't need that much. It's not that big of a surface. Okay. Alright, so I've got my black on here. Alright, trying to get to my point so that way I can, you know, make it a little darker. Or not a little darker, I'm sorry. Try to get to the point so I can make it a little more detailed of where I'm actually trying to place this black. There we go. And underneath of the tongue, we're going to make sure we get under there as well. Okay, so not doing the teeth, just doing the interior of the mouth. You may decide that you just want to do red or some other random color, I don't know, maybe green. And that's perfectly fine. I just really like in monsters like this, when they have their gullet open, I like to kind of make it look like it's some kind of endless pit that you want to be afraid of getting near. So that is why I chose to do that black color. Okay, and then I'm going to use this red that I had set aside for its tongue. I'm going to put a little bit of that over here. There we go. I don't need a whole lot because this is literally all I'm using it for. Okay. I am going to make sure a little bit of water is added to that one as well. I do want it to flow really nicely. There we go. Okay. Alright, so with the black, I started from the interior of the mouth and I worked out. And with the red, I'm going to start at the tip of the tongue and work in. Okay. And then I do want, when I get there, to be able to blend the red tongue with that black so that it actually seems like the tongue is going into this abyss of a mouth. So the way I will end up doing that, so I've tried to dry up a lot of what's on my brush and use what is on the miniature right now. And I am pulling my brush towards the black because it still has some red on it. And the reason I do that is because when you first lay your brush down, that's the most paint that's going to go on your miniature. And then as you pull away, it gets lighter. So you can see where I started my brush is much darker, and then where I ended with my brush, it's much lighter. You're pulling away, and so less paint is being able to drag where you're leaving it. And so that's what I'm doing with this tongue, is that I am trying to, you know, leave a lighter end as it gets closer to the mouth, so it looks like it fades into the black. Okay, let's get a little more red on here. Now, that purple that we had on the tongue was fairly dark, and so it does make this red look very dark as well. And you may not prefer that, and if that's the case, that's perfectly fine. The way you can work around that, if you've already done the purple on there like I have, is that you can go back to your white. I'll show you here in just a second, and I will lighten up the tongue at the end for myself as well, as soon as I get this part done. Okay, now I'm going to move back to black just a had. Oh, I just want it just barely on the end of my brush. And again, I'm going to start from the inside and work towards the red. So that way, less of my black is touching the red, and it should make a decent blend for me. Something else you could consider if you've done it before is also wet blending at this point. And so what that would look like is my black that's on there is still pretty wet. So I just took a little bit of red, and I'm going to go back and forth over where those two meet, where the red and the black meet. And because they're both still wet, we're seeing more of a blend between those two because they're both still wet, and the wet color naturally blends together. Okay. All right. So we want a little bit lighter on the end of our tongue, maybe. I'm going to take my off-white, or you can use your regular white, and I'm going to place that on the end of my tongue, maybe up the side here just a little bit. There we go. Okay. Doesn't have to be pretty or anything, because we're going to cover it right back up. There we go. Okay. So, got some white there at the end of my tongue. Clean my brush back off. There we go. I'm going to go back to my red. Now, here is a time where I would not recommend wet blending for this aspect, because if you wet blend the red and the white, you're going to end up with pink. If that's the color you want, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not the color I want. So I made sure that my white was fully dry before I start to apply this red back onto my miniature. So there we go. Ugh, there's a white spot underneath. There we go. All right, there we are. All right. So just trying to kind of brush up, blend that dark red with this light red. And look at that. On the end of our tongue is so much lighter just because we put white underneath of it. And then it goes right into that black abyss of a mouth. There we are. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do our teeth. So that we can start to see some shape in that mouth. Oh, I had a question, but I didn't quite hear it. I'm so sorry. Okay, so how many layers before I start losing some detail? So that is a great question. You can put, like, I'm trying to think. If you use the thinner paint, so watering it down like we've been doing, you can put probably 10 or so, maybe more, depending on how watered down your paint is, and still be able to see the detail. But if you typically use paint the way that it comes, like from the manufacturer, a lot of times you can start to lose the detail in maybe like the third or fourth layer of acrylic. So that is one reason that I do really like to water down my paints as well. I would rather put on multiple layers of a thin paint and be patient rather than glob on a hefty layer and then lose that detail. So I know that there are folks out there, there are painters out there that they will water down their paint so much that it does look like watercolor, and they will just continue to layer and layer and layer until they get what they want, and they will spend so much time doing that, and kudos to them for having that patience. I don't have that much patience, but yeah, so they do that, and it's called glazing. And that glazing technique can be super useful. And it actually is really nice and makes a gorgeous blend. Like when you're blending two different colors together, or if you're painting for competition and you're really trying to get those like highlights and stuff like that, like a lighting direction and kind of things like that. Again, we're not doing that here because I am painting for tabletop, not for tabletop play, not for contest. But anyway, glazing can be really super gorgeous for that kind of stuff, but it is very time consuming, and I just don't always have the patience for that. Which is probably why I don't win more awards. But that's okay. Like I said, I usually do this for fun anyway. This is not something that I want to go, I know I'm not as good as a lot of professionals, and I don't really care. So, but anyway, yeah, so really layering depends on how thick your paint is as to how many layers you can really get onto your miniature without losing any of that really nice detail of your miniature. So, oh, our teeth are kind of funky. They're, feel like they are flatter than the last one that I did. And that's probably just, because of an old, a mold error or something like that, when you're, when you get plastic miniatures, they don't always come out the same. You can have the same miniature and they'll just all be different. Or maybe I was just more patient in my last one, I don't know. Alright. Some of these bottom teeth going. So I am still using my off-white color, just FYI. Again, if you want to use your pure white, that is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And for his teeth, I probably could have used an even dingier white. I didn't really bring anything more so than what I've got here. And it honestly looks very white on the camera anyway. So probably not looking like a big difference for you guys, but I will say in person it does make a difference. But anyway, that being said, like I probably for this particular monster, I probably could use kind of a dingier cream color or a more bone, like a dirty bone color or something like that you would maybe use like on a zombie or a skeleton creature that's been like dug up or something like that. But gotta make do with what you got, right? Okay, I am just gonna put some detail on the tips of his teeth. You may not feel comfortable doing that, and that's perfectly fine. People are probably not going to pick your miniature up and start looking at this much of detail, but sometimes this kind of stuff bothers me, so I'm going to do it anyway. So I've got paint in my bristle of my brush, and I'm using the side to just kind of dab the tops of the teeth on the inside to try and make sure that it kind of covers that piece as well. The scary part of that is that, just like I did earlier, we're already done with the interior of the mouth, and I don't want to mess that up if I can help it. So I can always redo it, and that's fine, but if I don't have to, I don't want to. All right. So when I get to the actual eye itself, and I'm going to put some color on there. That's where our green is going to go. Actually, we might be pretty ready for that right now, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my actual eye first. and then see kind of how I feel about it. And a lot of monsters you'll see depicted with like the red like eye veins or whatever, you know, bloodshot eyes. And so if we get to the point where it looks like that's going to be a good fit for us in this miniature, I will probably try to do that. It doesn't always work out the way you want it to, but every once in a while it does, and it just looks great. It really just, and it kind of gives your monster just like this creepier aspect to it, you know? So we will see once I get the pupil in there and everything, and kind of see how we're feeling about it. Okay. Something else that I've done that I've enjoyed before, or I think is fun, kind of, you know, for creatures like this where they have the multiple eyes and things like that, is that I will often like to make each eye a different color. That's always fun, just to kind of give it something different. One time, my husband is super into beholders. He loves beholders. And one time I painted him a beholder, and each eye was a different color, and it was, what did I call it? Oh, I called it the prismatic beholder. And so each eye did something from the prismatic wall spell. So anyway, it was kind of neat. Okay, so I just, in case you missed it, sorry, I just went over the off-white colors again, just to kind of make sure I had a smooth coat on there, and I didn't overlap any of my purples, which there were a couple of places where I had accidentally overlapped my purples. So I just covered that back up again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my dark green first. So I've got a very dark green here. This light is kind of, there we go. I've got a very dark green. I'm going to add my palette. Maybe. Okay. There we are. Alright, got that added. So that's what I'm going to start with. And then I'll build to my lighter green. And then we will do the actual pupil itself. Okay. I'm not going to add any water to this green color at this point. I don't want it accidentally dripping down into more of my white areas. And actually, now that I'm seeing that green on my palette, it seems to be pretty thin anyway. You can kind of see it moving on my palette there. And so that's a good indicator that I might want to give it a try painting it with it before I start adding water to it. So something to consider when you're working on your paints. Okay, so I am gonna do kind of a more humanoid eye to start with. So I'm gonna do more of a circular eye on this creature for its color. So let's see. I think I'm just gonna kind of have it staring a little bit straight out. So let's just see what we come up with when I get started here. There we go. Alright. Got something started there, right? Alright. And then, okay. There's some aspects on here that I'm not super thrilled with, so I'm just going back around. There we go. Alright. Now for this particular one, I think I'm gonna do the eyes fairly similar, but I am gonna have like each of the little tentacles looking in its own direction. So while I wait for that green to dry, I'm gonna move over to this tentacle here, and I'm gonna have it looking off to the side here. So I'm just gonna, so I'm just cleaning my brush real quick because it was not really a sharp tip, and I definitely want to have a sharp tip as I am working on these eyes, because I need to be able to control my brush very well while I'm doing this like free-handed detail. So I just re-cleaned my brush because I wasn't happy with what was happening. So I re-cleaned it and just kind of got a point back to it. So I just kind of rolled it until its point came back, and now I'm feeling okay again. So I'm gonna go ahead, go back in. There we go. So we don't need as big of a circle because it's a smaller eye. So this guy's looking off over here to the side. Alright. Let's go over to this one. Let's have this one looking down over here. There we go. Okay. And then we'll have this one and be looking in on itself. What a weird concept, right? Could you imagine being able to look at yourself looking at something else besides through a mirror? Kind of weird, I feel like. There we go. Alright. Oh. Not quite as round as I wanted it. There we go. Okay. Again, this is a monster. So I don't have to have all of these eyes the same size. Like, this one is a pretty small circle, especially compared to this one that I just did, which is a pretty big circle, because I had a little extra indent that I made on one side, so it wasn't very round. So I just redid it, and it's just a little bigger. But that's okay. This is a crazy made-up creature that's some kind of, you know, aberration, so it doesn't really matter. Alright, let's have this one looking off over here. Some of you, it probably sounds like I'm just making excuses for my mess-ups. That's okay. You can think what you want. Alright. What was the question? Sorry. Oh, so fixing an eye if you've got it messed up the first time, depending on how bad it is. If it's just like something that you've messed with a couple of times and it's just not coming out the right way, I would almost just, again, if you've been using thin enough paint, you should be able to just like wipe that puppy over again and just start fresh. And I have absolutely had to do that on characters before. People eyes are so hard. So I know people that don't even really try hardly on people eyes. Are just like, well, just don't look at their face. But anyway, so if you've used thin enough paint, I say white it out, try it over again. If that's not an option, maybe your character now has an eye patch. You can use green stuff to actually make a very nice, like, facial feature of some kind. I know this doesn't have anything to do with messing up a miniature painting or anything like that, but my husband likes to have characters that wear masks sometimes. Maybe if your character, maybe you weren't intending for your miniature to have a mask, but maybe that's something that ends up happening if you know, especially if you're creating an NPC. Just make up a new story for them and give them a mask or an eye patch or something to that effect, that could, you know, make up for that imperfection on your miniature. I think those are kind of dire situations if you just really are not getting through whatever is screwing up on the eye. But yeah, for the most part, I say use the white, cover it, and then retry. All right. Okay, so I've got my lighter green color here, and I am going to go back over this area. So what I'm going to try and do is leave just the ever slightest ring of that dark green around the outside. Because a lot of times, if you truly look close at a human eye, which I'm trying to go more human-esque for this creature, sometimes that can be creepy to see a human aspect to such a monstrosity. Anyway, so the human eye, typically the outside of the colored part of the human eye is darker than the rest of the eye, and the closer you get to the actual pupil is typically the lighter part of the eye. I double checked myself because I was like, I think that's right, and then I looked before the session to make sure that that was the case. So something we have talked a little bit about, but not a whole lot about this session, is using reference photos. And you just Google things. You know, if you're questioning something, or you're like, oh man, I'm to the eye, and I can't even think of what that would look like. Just Google it, you know, and kind of you can kind of get an idea from that about what you should be looking at doing. And so literally before this session, I was like, I'm pretty sure the outside is usually the darker area, but then my brain started to question myself, so I just Googled it. Alright, I'm gonna do some of these smaller eyes while that middle part's drying. And again, this is a monster. We don't have to be perfectionists. If the eye color is not quite right on some of the aspects, it is not gonna hurt anything for us to just be like, this is a weird monster. There we go. I think I am going to make this a little more of the lighter green and less of the darker green. Almost to make it look a little wider than the other eyes. I think I like that. There we go. Let's do this one over here. Maybe we do less green on this one, or less light green on this one. Make more of that dark show. Okay, there we go. This other one here. I think that one I actually messed up pretty bad. Let me see if I can fix it with this green, or if I need to start that over. My brush is getting a little messed up again. Okay, let me rinse my brush out. I'm going to do my drying again. Try and get that point back. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna try again on this eye. I'm not real happy with the shape of it. See if we can recover it, or if we want to start over. I think we're okay. I think we are okay. Alright. Okay. Not bad. Okay. Alright, so we've got just kind of a variety of different things going on with our eyes here. And then something else I want to do. I don't want them to be flat like they are, which honestly they kind of look neat for such a creature. But a lot of eyes, and actually I think I'm going to use my dry brush for this part. Even though I'm not actually going to be dry brushing. That's a little wide. Maybe I can flatten this one out. So what I want to do is I actually want some of that green, a dark green, to come down into my lighter green. So I'm going to try and flatten this brush out a little bit. There we go. Okay, I'm liking the way that looks. And I'm going to take just a little bit of that dark green on the tips of my brush. And I'm going to try, we'll see if this works, I'm going to try and start at the dark edge, the dark green edge, and just kind of pull in to the middle a little bit. It's not really doing what I want it to do. Let's try a different brush. This may be a waste of time. We will see. Okay, if we do this. Okay, I'm going to try and flatten that out. Alright, I just want to pull down just ever so slightly. I'm going to pull some of that dark green in. Okay, so it's not looking quite so much like a flat eye, just a flat colors. I'm really wanting to pull that dark green in so it looks like more natural-esque, at least a little bit. There we go. Okay, not too bad. Anything is just more time consuming, but maybe it will be worth it. If not, we've used thin enough paint. We can always start over, at least on the green parts. Okay, it's kind of looking kind of neat. Yeah, not too bad. Okay, there's a couple of spots I just want to touch up on that. See if it can make it look a little better. Again, I'm just starting on the dark, pulling into the light, trying to make that just look a little more blended, just a bit. Alright, not too bad. Looks kind of funky, but I don't think I mind it, really. I think it's okay. The kind of creature that we have. Alright, I'm going to do this just a little bit on these outside ones. Nothing super fancy. Just kind of trying to touch up and give them a little bit more color back into that bright green area so that it doesn't look flat. Okay, there we go. Now, the smaller the eye, the less you have to do these kind of things. You know, if you're doing a person's eye, you know you don't have as much room to play with. And so you're not really typically, unless you're super talented, and kudos to you if you are, but you're not typically playing with all this space to make the eye look more interesting. Typically for a human figurine, you're really just looking for the white, the color, and then the black pupil, and that is really pretty much it. And I say black pupil, but I've used, oh, I got some green in my white there. I've used browns for the pupil before, just something dark, you know, something dark to give it that look. Okay, now I got some green on my white there. I'm gonna hope that I can cover it up still without making too much of a fuss. I think I should be able to. It's just a smallest ever dab. Oh yeah, perfect. There we go. I don't even think I'm going to need a second coat. It was such a thin line of green. All right, perfect. Okay. We still have some black on our tray here. I'm going to move back over to that color on my palette. Make sure that I've got a nice tip on the end of my brush. I'll take this black and I'm going to just do I'm not going to make this look like a circle. I kind of want it to look a little odd. So it's like, it's almost human, but kind of different. So, very small kind of dot there. So, for the eye size, it should look a little awkward, a little creepy. His eyes. There we go. Put the little dot there. There we go. Oh, so there's been a question of, do I ever lick my brush? Yes, I absolutely do. So, this is going to sound so weird for some of you, I'm sure, but saliva is actually a very good way to make your paint flow a little smoother. And so sometimes what I'll do, instead of using my paper towel to like make my brush have a point, I will use my tongue. I have accidentally done it while there's still paint on my brush. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. I have only done that on accident. But I will sometimes purposely put my paintbrush in my mouth to make a finer point on it. It works really well. It's weird, but that's just the way it is. And I found I do have other people, I have friends that also do that, so I don't feel as bad or as weird for doing it, but it apparently in the painting world can be a common thing to find amongst painters, that they do that. So just an interesting little tidbit. Okay. All right. Creepy eyes. I think that's pretty creepy. Okay, I am going to try to do the bloodshot part of the eyes. I have a little bit of red still here on my tray, but I don't trust it to be fresh enough for such detailed work, so I'm going to put some more down. I'm gonna put a fresh spot on my tray. See if my paint will work with me here. There we go. There we are. Okay. Alright. So hopefully this will not take a whole lot of paint. I haven't put too much on my tray, but we can always get more if we need it. Okay. So for my detailed work, I really, it's really just all about the point of my brush. And so I honestly, I barely ever use those super tiny brushes. I do have some. So I have a ton of brushes. It's ridiculous. Almost none of them get used. They're here for backup. Let me look. Here we go. So, I have this little tiny thing. Barely looks like it even has a bristle at the end of it. And I actually have some friends that they will always go to this when they're using my brushes, for their detail. But for me, it doesn't hold enough water, and the paint on the end of it dries out too fast. And I want my paint to always be able to flow. And these thicker brushes with the fine tip, they hold more water, which keeps your paint wetter longer. And so I actually prefer the paintbrushes that are bigger with a extremely fine tip. Okay, I am going to put this red just on the ever so slight tip of my brush. Okay. Are you ready? I'm nervous. Okay, let's see. All right, let's do... Oh, you know what I just thought about? Okay, hang on. Okay, sorry. So anticlimactic. But I am going to really fast just search for bloodshot eyes to make sure that I actually do this correctly. Bloodshot eyes. Images. Okay. Okay, all right. So I want to make sure that I'm coming from the right direction when I am doing these. Okay, all right. All right, I feel better about this now. All right, so I washed my paintbrush off because I did not want it to sit there and dry out. So I'm just refilling my paintbrush. Okay. And I probably should use a darker red for this maybe, or maybe not, I don't know, but we're just going to use what we've got and it'll be fine. My paintbrush is already drying out. All right. Basically holding my breath, which is why I'm not talking, sorry. Alright, get some little marks about the eye there. Maybe pull that up a little bit more. This is probably where a glaze master would be able to do like a very light offset of that white that I've got on here to kind of give it a more red-eyed kind of look without losing any of the other detail. But I'm just not good enough to do that that wash over the top like that. So we're just gonna go with what we've got. Use the talent that we've got and not pretend we've got more. So I'm really having to keep wetting my paintbrush, going back, adding the paint back to the tip again, making sure my tip is nice and sharp, be able to get this detail. But in my experience, if I had been using that smaller brush that I showed you before, I would I'd be having even more trouble than I am right now trying to get that to work and having to go back for more paint more regularly. So again, that's just my experience. Other people, you know, they might find it easier, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that they're doing it wrong. Doesn't mean that I'm doing it wrong. It is literally just, you know, what do you feel comfortable using when you're doing these kind of things? Because that is the biggest thing, is like finding your comfort level, finding what works for you, because even though we all might have, you know, the same resources, our brains don't function the same. Our hands can't always do the same patterns, you know, things like that. So always different techniques, and I feel like I'm always learning new things too. That is why I do love going to conventions and talking to people and just seeing what other people are doing and stuff like that. So this is probably a little thicker than I probably wanted some of these to be, but I don't know. It's kind of working for us, I think. Just licked paint. Don't do that. Okay. I don't know. I think it's okay. I think it's not too bad. He looks a little crazy, which I think is also okay. All right. Well, I don't want to waste your guys' time too much with doing all the eyes in that fashion. I will probably go back later on and do that, but at least that kind of gives you a concept. Like I said, you want that nice sharp tip. Put the paint just ever so slightly on the edge of your paintbrush, so you can just barely see it's on the tip of my paintbrush there, and then that's when you just want to kind of lightly brush across. Okay, so that's if you're trying to do something like super detailed like that on a smooth surface, because this eye is completely smooth. I didn't have anything to follow through, and a lot of times they'll call that like freehanding. So I was just freehanding those little veins. So yeah, so that's kind of my recommendation there. Now I didn't have like a pattern that I was using or anything like that, so I just kind of did what looked like what I would think that an eye would kind of look like. So I didn't use a specific pattern or anything like that. Okay. I do want to give more detail to some of our back ends here, and then I've also got some spots where I had gotten that white on them on my Spectator here, so I want to kind of fix those spots as well. So I'm going to do that real quick. All right, that means I have to go back to my purple color. So for about the natural hair versus synthetic hairs, I do like the natural hairs more. In fact, this Raphael that I was talking about is kind of one of my favorite brushes to use, that I've had for almost 4 years now. This one, trying to remember what type of fur it uses. Oh gosh, I can't remember. But it is a real animal's fur, that is like very soft and holds its shape well. And so I do actually prefer these ones. Again, the synthetic ones, if you're willing to, like, after a little while, like, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of money on the synthetic ones. I would just get the cheaper ones that you are either okay with throwing away, or you're okay with them turning into your dry brush brushes. Okay. I want to touch up some of these parts that have the white coated back on them. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Where I accidentally got some of that white and then didn't catch it in time to get it removed. Oof, I got a lot of spots on there. Holy cow. I did not do a good job when I was doing those whites on the bone. That off-white color. Shame on me. Alright, there we go. There's another spot there. Do that right there. There we go. Alright. There's a couple more little ones in there, but I'm not super worried about those ones next to the bone. Alright, I think that's pretty good. So if you have this gazer, you'll notice that next to his cheeks here, there's some really good ridges and detail, and I really like those a lot. So I'm gonna use this like grayish purple that I have. This is that lighter color of kind of purple. So if you have an actual like light purple, that's perfectly fine. This was just something that came in this set that I had bought of these purples, and it's just kind of a grayish purple. It's okay. I like it all right. It's just what I have in hand. But if you have like an actual light purple, you may want to use that instead. I think that would be really pretty. Is it pretty for this crazy beholder or crazy monster? But anyway, I do think it would look really nice if you used an actual lighter purple rather than this grayish purple that I'm going to be using. But you know, again, we use what we've got, and so this is what I've got. So I have taken my brush. This is my Raphael again. That is usually my fine tip, but I've kind of flattened it. So I took on both sides and just kind of laid it out, and I'm filling my brush with that. And I'm just gonna lightly brush over those places. So it's almost dry brushing, but I'm not doing it in a quick manner, and my brush is holding a little bit more water than I would want if I was dry brushing. So, but it is kind of similar because I'm trying not to get into those crevices of this piece and just trying to kind of touch on those higher aspects of the miniature. So I'm just trying to catch some of those higher edges with the side of my brush. And if you feel like this is not light enough for you, you could take that off-white that we were using before and do this same thing. And then to pull that purple back out, go back over it with the purple. And actually, I will go ahead and do that on this other side so that you can kind of see how that works. So let's do a little bit of this white, off-white. Okay, not adding water because again, I just want a little bit on there, and I want it to hold its shape on the miniature. So if I do have enough to actually put on my miniature. Alright, so if I do this, this is going to be a lighter color on there. Turn it so I can see where I'm putting this. There we go. This is it's showing a lot more with this white, a lot more of that detail. But maybe I don't want it to actually look white. So what I'll do, now that I've got like that part on there, what I'll do is I'll go back over it with my regular purple color. And it should help that purple just pop a little bit more. So it still shows the depth. It makes that purple look lighter. So we talked about this earlier with this layering aspect and being conscious of what we are putting underneath of our colors. So if we're putting a lighter color underneath of a darker color, It's going to make that darker color look lighter than as if we had put it on top of black or something like that. So just kind of gives us a different look. Okay, so this side is kind of a darker gray color, where this side is that lighter purple color. So we can do that on any of these places that we kind of want to have like a different look about them. I forgot to clean my brush out. So maybe we want some of these back areas to have kind of that lighter color. Actually, back here, we probably could do our dry brushing back here. We've got more room to play with rather than having to be cautious of the other things around it. So let me get my dry brush out here. I'm just putting the paint on the end of my brush. Okay, and I don't want it to be too wet, so I am wiping some of it off on my paper towel here so that it's just barely still in the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to drag it over opposite of where I want it to fall. So these lines are kind of rolling parallel to me, so I am pulling my brush kind of perpendicular to that because that's where I want the paint to catch for me. So there we go. Okay. I got to be careful around the eye because there is a little bit up here on the edge, but I also don't want my eye to get damaged. We took quite a while on that eye, and I don't want to mess that up. But I do want this ridge up here to be a little different. There we go. Okay. Just a little bit there. Okay, now we can come back down here. A little bit more, maybe a little bit over these tentacles, just to kind of catch some of those higher aspects of those tentacles. There we go. Alright, grab some of that. Again, this is a monster. We can, you know, we can have any excuse under the sun as long as it, you know, looks like it blends well. About why this monster has these lighter aspects or darker aspects or whatever, because it's not a real monster. So it's okay to kind of play around with these colors, because you can always go back over. You know, like I said, we're using very light layers so that we can go back over them later on if we want to. Alright, now I'm going to dry brush on, so where I've put that off-white, I'm now going to dry brush on some purple to just kind of make that stand out a little bit more. Now this purple, I do need to be a little bit more cautious, even more so than I was with the white, because these white spikes back here, these bone spikes, I can already tell I totally touched one and it's got purple on it now. So so you do got to be a little bit more careful when you're using these darker colors. I got a little excited with my start there and messed that up. But again, you may want to go back to one of the smaller brushes and just use the side of the brush instead of using the tip. Use the side to brush across. If you get nervous and you feel like your dry brush is going to be a little too much to control, because it can be challenging to control a dry brush sometimes for some of those more detailed, fine detailed areas. Right. I think I've got a lot of those covered. where I had put that white. And I may end up finding some spots later. I can always come back and dry brush this purple back onto those areas as well. It's absolutely fine. Alright. So, it's probably kind of hard to tell in the video, but that purple is really shining through more on those little aspects, those little ridges of our Spectre here, making it look pretty nice. Alright. Okay, I'm liking that pretty well. Now, something we can do, did I bring out, I guess I don't have it out with me, but I do have some browns in my box. If I wanted to, I could tame these spikes down. If they feel like they're a little too bright for what I'm going for on my miniature, I could take that brown that I have and water it down, and I do a lighter color brown, water it down, and make it into like an ink. So if you already have like a Sophie, I forget what that one's called, but if you have like a lighter brown ink already, perfect. You don't need to water it down, it's already ink. But if you don't have ink, again, painting can be pretty expensive. So you can kind of make your own ink. It doesn't quite flow as beautifully as the true ink does, but it will work. So you can take that and like go into each of these bones and fill those creases in these little bone aspects, and it will just make that white pop even more because it's showing the depth with that ink. So that's actually the bonus of using ink, is being able to kind of make the deep crevices look even deeper than when you're just doing one solid color. So that would be something I would probably recommend doing if you felt like your bones on your back were just a little too bright. If I had the brown out already, I probably would go ahead and do it, but I'd have to go dig for that, and I don't want you guys to have to fuss through that. Okay, I think, unless anybody wants to chat anything else on there, I think this Spectre is pretty good. It's real creepy. That eye, man. So we had a question about sealing miniatures, and when I first started painting, I would seal my miniatures in a gloss spray, but I did that because I thought it was cool to make them kind of look glossy. However, I found out later from some other miniature painters that it actually like shows less detail in your miniature when you do that, because the gloss just attracts the eye more and you can't actually see some of the details that you've done to your miniature before. So for tabletop, that's not a terrible thing unless you have put a lot of effort and detail into your miniature. So gloss is okay, but I will tend to do a matte finish instead now, just in case. The other aspect of using a matte finish, or like a matte sealer, is if you ever got to the point where you wanted to touch up pieces of your miniature, that matte finish is a lot more forgiving than the gloss finish is. So if you do want to seal your miniatures, that would be my recommendation, is to use a matte finish. And I just use like a matte clear spray from Walmart and just spray them down. But that all being said, that's if you want to seal your miniatures. There's a lot of times where I won't seal my miniatures if I don't think that I'm going to use them for tabletop. So back to this guy that I was showing you before, I did not put any kind of sealer on this one. So, so none of these miniatures that are on here have been sealed. So they're all the way that I left them painted. Because even a matte finish seal can still pull some of that detail away from the eye being able to view it. So if it's a miniature that I want for more of a display aspect, then I would not do any kind of sealer. But if it's a miniature that you plan to actually use on the table, like this guy I'm probably going to use in one of my games, then I would definitely use a matte sealing, because you're going to have people touching it, picking it up, messing with it, and I have already had issues with my ones that are not sealed that I did end up playing with, where pieces get rubbed off. It's nobody's fault, you know, we have oil on our fingers, the paint like rubs against it, and it comes off sometimes. And so then I've had to touch up my miniatures, and that can be kind of challenging to do without making it look like over painted or thick. So so any miniature that you think you're going to actually play with, I would go ahead and use a matte sealer. So for the distress look, I don't do that to my miniatures. I know some people that do that, and that's perfectly fine if that is like how you want your, like, to get that distressed look. But I tend to get the distressed look through dry brushing instead. And so if there is a part of my miniature, trying to think, let me pull up this guy again. So like if I wanted the ends of this guy's shield to be a lighter color, I might then try and do some kind of rub on that to kind of like get some of that paint off, so that it's not going to take as many layers to get to that lighter color that I want. I might do something like that with the rub for distress kind of look, but I would still put an extra layer of paint on it that's going to be that color of distress that I want. So if you are trying to rub off the paint from your miniature, it's not just going to be that last layer you put on that gets rubbed off. It's going to be like all the paint, and you're going to go down to the actual like metal piece or plastic piece if you're using plastic. So and I personally prefer not to have that showing whenever possible. So that's why I would dry brush to show that weathered look or that distressed look. Okay, so I do want to also show, so like I said, I had super glued this guy onto this base, or onto this medicine thing. So little pressure, pops right off. Now I can glue him onto his base that he came with. If I want to do that, I could glue him onto another base. I could give him like some kind of scenery to be a part of. You know, whatever I wanted to do, I can now do that. So just, it's really easy to pop them right off of the little tops over there and things. Like I said, this guy did come with these two little gazer dudes. And they're pretty fun to paint as well. They're very, very, very simple little guys, but they can be really fun. I painted these ones to be kind of color coded or color comboed with this one here. And I gave their eyes, I don't even know if that's coming through very well, but the eyes on these guys, I painted them a little different. They are instead like little slits. Gosh, I don't know that you can see that, but it's just so tiny of an eye on these little guys that instead of actually doing like a whole detailed eye, I painted like a little slit. And if you play D&D, these little gazers, they have almost like little X's for eyes. So you could also do something like that to portray on these little tiny mini guys here. But oh, say that again, Stephanie. Sorry. Oh, okay. So we do actually have time to go ahead and paint them. So why don't I go ahead and try and paint one for you guys and see what we can get this one to turn out like. So let's paint him kind of similar to our other dude here. Let's do, ooh, or what if we do the opposite? What if we do green and we make his eyes purple? Let's do that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna use. So a lot of times I do find that these smaller miniatures can be a bit harder. You think, originally you think, oh man, it's less surface, I don't have to do as much. But really, if you don't do just as much, or, if not more, they just look so plain, and it's just like you painted a little ball of nothing. So they can be pretty challenging to paint these tiny little things and actually make them look like something. So yeah, I find tiny things to be more challenging. So take that for what it is. Maybe some people don't have such a hard time doing that, but I definitely do. Alright, let's get some of this green. I'm just adding some water to my darkest green color. I don't have a medium between these two, so what I'm going to probably do is end up mixing them after I get my first coat down. So let's go ahead and put green on here. This is my darkest green that I have. And I'm just going to cover the whole thing in it. Little tiny guy. So, speaking of difficult things, and like what's difficult to paint and such, I find that tiny things like this are often difficult. They're fun and they're cute, but they are difficult. But also too big of miniatures can just be a crazy challenge. I actually have some pretty large miniatures at home that have just been sitting there because they just seem so daunting to get started. And I had attempted to paint one. Reaper has this miniature that's, they'll never say this, but it's basically the Tarrasque. And I started to paint it, and I got my base coat on, and I have not touched that thing since. It took so long to get that base coat over top of everything that I just got tired of it. So, so ginormous miniatures. That guy's like this big, like it's huge. They are also very much a challenge. So, you gotta find that happy medium, or maybe you like painting big miniatures, and that's awesome. I find them very daunting and very hard to be that patient with covering that much surface. Alright, so that guy, let's let this guy dry. I'm gonna stick him over here. Let's do this one. So you may not have, you may like painting smaller miniatures. You may like painting larger miniatures. Maybe you like the in-betweens. Maybe this is a good size. Maybe that griffin is a good size. I think, honestly, probably the griffin is probably the best size for me. Like, I like painting wolves and dragons and things that are about that size, as the griffin was. So just like a young dragon or a dire wolf, or, things like that. Displacer beasts, I think those are fun. I enjoy those. But Yeah. Okay. Alright, that guy's got a good coat on him. Also, smaller surface means that it takes longer for us to move on to the next section because we just covered this thing, so it's not dry yet. Alright, I think this guy is probably fairly dry. Alright, I think I'm going to go ahead and move to the eye and at least putting the coat on the eyes. First coat, sorry, on the eyes. So let's do that real quick. So just in case any of the extra green bits are not dried, we can at least wait for those to finish drying while we put the first touches on these little eyeballs. Alright. And honestly, they're not, if you have these guys, they're not crazy detailed. You can kind of see where the eyes are, but they're not super great on definition of those eyes. So I just kind of put some little white dots on there, and we're going to call that those eyes. I did not water down this white, just FYI. I did not water down this white to put on those eyes because I did not want it to run. I did not want any chance of it to run into anything else. So this is just straight white. Okay. Holding my breath again. It's so tiny. It's not necessarily a good idea to hold your breath while you're painting, so I don't recommend it. Sometimes you just can't help it. So these little guys' eyes make me think of like I don't know, like those old-fashioned sunglasses that were just like those bars across your face. That's what it kind of makes me think of, because this is like this little rent straight across. Alright, there's that. I did get that white on a little bit of the green there, so I'm just gonna touch the green on the end of my paintbrush and just run right over that little side where I messed that up. And then you probably can't see it, but I can, so I'm gonna do something about it. There's a little bit of white on this little ridge at the base of the eye, so I just want to run back over that as well. There we go. Okay, that's feeling pretty good. I'm gonna put just a little bit of red in his mouth, just so that we know that it's an actual mouth. So I'm just gonna put it on the tip of my brush and just dip it right in there and just kind of brush back and forth just a little bit. There we go. Probably a little bit of excess red in there, but not sure we're gonna be able to do much better with that little tiny mouth right there, but that's okay. While I've got the red, I don't want it to dry out because it is getting there on my palette here, so I'm just gonna dab in that again and go ahead and do this guy's mouth while I got him. There we go. Okay. Alright. So at least he's got a mouth. That's something, right? There we go. Okay. Alright. Okay, so we've got the dark green on there. Let's pull out this bright green. It's called like slime or something. Dungeon slime is what it's called. That name always makes me laugh. Alright. Still got my fine tipped one. I'm going to take this lime green color. Instead of doing some kind of shading or something, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick some spots that I want to be this light green color. This creature, although there's painters out there that could do this. They could pull it off, and I know that. But I am not going to necessarily attempt to do any kind of blending on this little tiny guy. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pick some areas that I think could be this lighter color. And if you have this miniature, you'll see that its back side here has all these little bumpies on it. It's a very, very bumpy little guy. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this light green and I'm just going to ever so slightly just dab all those little spots wherever I want this green to be. And I'm just going to give him some speckles. Alright. There's a spot. There's a spot. And I don't have to do this on every spot if I don't want to. In fact, again, being a creature of chaos and weirdness, I could even grab a whole nother color if I wanted to. Maybe I will make a couple of these spots purple when I go to grab my purple for his eyes. That could really help kind of draw that color out to another area if that's what I wanted to do. And it would look unnatural, but in a like a monstrosity kind of way, I feel like. Again, I don't have to do that either. If I had some other types of green, or if I wanted to mix some greens, the two greens that I have, I could do that. If I wanted some different colors in these spots. But I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like this very bright green on top of this dark green. It looks like he's got little sick spots or something. A little like underlip back here. You can see his jawline all the way to the back side. I think I'm gonna just follow that jawline across and just kind of outline that jawline. Let's outline this top lip too. Just kind of bring a little bit more attention to his odd shape and odd size. There we go. Maybe his eyebrow. Let's just kind of brush over that a little bit. Maybe in the corners down here. Alright, just kind of gives him a little character, little something extra that just makes him look funky. You know? I could put... Well, I was gonna say I could put some dots on the back of his eyes there, but I think I'm gonna leave him the darker color. In fact, I may go, actually, I'm gonna pull this dark green color again and just retouch up those back sides of his eyes to make them the real dark. Just as dark as they can be at this green color. There we go. I like that pretty well. Okay, so there's that. Now let's look at our eyes. We're going to use that purple that we did before. So I'm going to just jump straight to the middle color instead of going to the dark purple and then back and forth. Because again, so tiny. Can't really see that kind of detail on them. So alright, make sure our tip is nice and fine. I'll take that purple. Alright, it's kind of globbed up on my end, so I'm just going to brush off some of that purple so that it is just to the tip. And I think I'm gonna do up and down lines on these eyes up here. There we go. There we go. Get a little bit more paint for this last one. There we go. Okay, so it's kind of hard to focus when it's up that close, sorry, but they're just little slits. Just ever so slightest little slits on their eyes there. Now again, if you're looking at like a monster manual or something like that, where these critters come from, at least in D&D, I'm not sure if they're in other RPGs or anything like that. They have these eyes that are just little slits. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and flatten out my brush again. Okay, there we go. We're going to see if this will work. I don't know. I may have to do it a different way, but we're going to try. Alright. I'm going to take this purple, now that my brush is a little more flat, and I'm going to try and get this purple kind of thinned out on there. And I'm going to do just a little X. So let's try and do that. Oof, I don't know that this was a good idea. And then an X the other way. Oh, not working. All right, we're gonna white it out and do it again. Okay, where'd my white go? There it is. All right, I'm gonna make sure. Is that purple dry? Yeah, it was a pretty thin layer of purple, so it's pretty dry already. So we're just gonna white out over top. Boop. Never happened. Except for there's a recording showing it did. No. Alright, so I'm gonna go back to just my ever so thin line. Just this point of my brush. I'm going to try the X again to be kind of similar to the actual monster manual for this one. But if this time it doesn't work, I'm just going to do a slit. Alright, let's see what we can do here. Alright, so... Okay, that's a little better. Okay, got one side. Dang it. The paint thing again. Alright. Okay, here we go. A little X. Oh, alright. I don't know if you can see that, because again, it's so dang tiny. But he's got a little X on his eyeball now. If you could see it. Anyway. Well, okay. So, honestly, there's that guy. little tiny critter. And his buddy. They go so well together. Okay. So there are our beasts, our little monstrosities that we have created. So, okay. Any other questions before we jump off? All right. Well, If you guys think of anything, I am on the Discord, so feel free to find me. I love to share and talk about things. Feel free to share your miniatures with me. I love to see what people have done and see all the cool different aspects and things that people come up with. Otherwise, hopefully you were able to get at least a little bit of something out of today, or at least have some fun watching me with all my little hiccups that I had this time. But I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a really great last day for Midwest Game Fest. Hope to see you in person sometime soon in the fall, maybe.